first time, our speaker is Peter Tasker, and he's bringing another book, so he's quite a prolific author. So Peter is based, he claims, in Tokyo, but I know he's also partly based in Oxford. And as well as his cultural activities, which are numerous, he is also active as a financier. I think previously the book that he introduced here was Shuji Terayama, sort of underground Japanese icon. And today we're focusing on the film director Kurosawa, and of course he's a very well-known figure. And it's about this book, which will be for sale downstairs. But I think I'll just leave it at that and hand straight over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Jason, and thanks everybody for showing up tonight. What I'd like to do is to start with a clip. So this will be, if we can just put down the lights a little bit so we can all see it better. It's like...
Alicia, can you just turn the lights down?
Off we go. So let's begin with the end. So here I am, being carried down a quick-flowing river, with my face 2 inches underwater. Does that mean I'm dead? I think it probably does. If so, I've died the death of a true samurai. That's a strange thought. I'd laugh if my mouth and lungs weren't full of water. Once I was a thief. I sneaked into people's houses and stole money and valuables. A few times I had to kill someone to get away. Am I a bad man? Yes, probably. The magistrate said so when he sentenced me to crucifixion. I was tortured to make me confess, but I refused to say a word. The torturer respected me for that. This book, can I just say a few words about it before we get to the main event, about Kurosawa himself? Some of you may be wondering how in this day and age a book can cost 30 quid. And well, I would like to say that it's actually more on Amazon.com, so this is a very good price for those who wish to purchase it. Furthermore, it's not a mere book. Of course, you can read it if you wish to, but you can also stroke it. Look at that paper, really special paper here, and you can have a little sniff too, if you wish to. What I've tried to do in this book is to offer a multiplicity of perspectives on Kurosawa. I've written something about every one of the films he directed, of which there are 30, and 12 other films which he's associated with, mainly because in most cases, because he wrote the screenplay for them. And I've also looked at and covered many of the key episodes and themes in his life. For example, what was he doing on that day in August 1945 when Japan surrendered? What was he thinking? Also, Kurosawa's relationship and final break with his great leading man, Toshiro Mifune. So the relationship with Mifune, the relationship with women in his life and in his films. And also I've contrasted the concept of the samurai ethic of Kurosawa and that of Yukio Mishima, which is very different indeed. So I've often tried to bring forward as many voices as I can of particularly the collaborators of Kurosawa, the people who wrote with him, his actors, and people he knew, like the great composer Toru Takemitsu, and even Mishima, who was actually not at all sympathetic to Kurosawa. Kurosawa died in 1998, so that's 20 years ago last year. And after a creative artist has passed from the scene and the years go by, there's a sort of process of revaluation which takes place, and obviously it can go in two directions. In some cases, they might be forgotten or fade away into the memory, particularly if what they did in their lifetime was very much of its time, and as times change, did not have much lasting power. On the other hand, there are some artists whose work gains in stature, grows in stature as the years go by. And I think that's the case with Kurosawa. But it's not just me who thinks that. In the autumn of last year, the BBC did a very interesting survey of foreign language films. That means non-English language films. And it was much more comprehensive than the usual type of survey. They canvassed the opinions of over 200 film critics, academics and experts. And of those, less than half were from Western Europe and North America. So it was very diverse geographically. There were people from Africa, the Middle East, South America, Central America, Eastern Europe, all over Asia. And 45% of the participants were women as well. So it was quite unusual in that respect, in this diversity. The result of this was a ranking of these films, and Kurosawa had two of the top four. The top film was Seven Samurai, and the fourth film was Rashomon. Two other Kurosawa films were in that top 100. So Kurosawa remains very highly rated in the world as a whole. It's quite interesting, for example, that of the 21 Chinese critics who are contributed to this survey, 16 of them chose a Kurosawa film amongst their top 10 films. Kurosawa seems to be highly rated everywhere except for one country. That is Japan. And out of 6 critics from Japan who participated in the survey, not a single one chose a Kurosawa film. So maybe we can speculate a little bit later about why that should be so. Kurosawa's great collaborator, Shinobu Hashimoto, who wrote Rashomon, Seven Samurai, and Ikiru with him, collaborated, said there will never be another Kurosawa. And I think that's right. He was the product of a particular time and a particular place. And both of those factors contributed very much to what he was able to achieve. And we think about when he was born, it was 1910. He died in 1998. A lot happened in that time. In Japan, and particularly the whole history of Japan's turbulent 20th century, there's really no end to the things that could be said about it. So tremendous material, if you like. I think there are 3 particular points that are interesting here. The first is that his formative years were spent in the Taisho era, which is 2012 to, did I just say 2000? Just trying to catch you up. 1912 to 1926. And that's a period which is usually considered to be a period of openness, political freedoms to some extent, and cultural curiosity. Japan is like a sponge, absorbing influences from the rest of the world, and the influences from the rest of the world were easily and quickly available due to some innovations in communications technology of the time. So his Taisho spirit, he used to refer to himself as a man of the Taisho period. He was still doing that in 1985 when he gave an interview to Playboy. So a long time after, he considered himself a man of the Taisho era. 2 other very important points, historical events. One was the earthquake of 1923, which knocked Tokyo flat, parts of it. And Kurosawa's brother, his elder brother, Heigo, who he admired very greatly, took him on a tour of death and disaster. He would have been, at that time, 13 years old. And his brother took him to see all the dead bodies, some of them charred beyond all recognition, some of them bloated and floating around in canals and rivers. And he said to him, you've got to keep your eyes open. You must look at this. You cannot ignore it, which he did. This is from in his autobiography, by the way. And the second one, key point, of course, is the war and the destruction of the war. Again, Tokyo destroyed again. So what we have here is a natural disaster and a man-made disaster. And I think there are two sort of threads in Kurosawa's work, and which to put it very, very simply, there is a humanistic thread, which is that human beings are put in extreme conditions, and they've got the ability to make some choices and make some changes by their decisions, and so they have agency in that case. And that's the case, perhaps, if you look at a man-made disaster, you're thinking about how do people behave in that, what choices do they have. But the natural disaster has a totally different meaning, because you can't do anything about that. It doesn't matter. You have no agency. If you survive, that's great. If you don't survive, that's bad luck. You can't do anything about it. And it's vast, happens on a vast scale. So I see that these two elements in his work, one is a concentration on agency and what you can do under extreme conditions, how do people behave, and the other is a more fatalistic, you might cyclical view of what happens, events. They recur. You don't have progress because everything gets destroyed, and you can't do anything about that. So two very different strands, and he brings these together in his work. They're there all the time, but I think his later work is very much more, if you like, pessimistic. I would say there's perhaps a Buddhist tinge to the thinking on this, and it comes also with his interest in Japanese literature, which we'll talk about again in a minute. The period of his life was also the period in which cinema developed as an art. From 1910 to 1998, cinema was just starting to become a popular art form when he was growing up. And he was very fortunate, so he was at the right time and he was in the right place. He was very fortunate in the family into which he was born. His dad was in some ways very traditional. He was an instructor in a military academy. He made his son do kendo and calligraphy and traditional arts. But there was one novelty which he was very much smitten by, and that was cinema. And he would take the whole family to what were then very new cinemas that were cropping up all over Tokyo. And Kurosawa saw his first film when he was 6 or 7 years old. So obviously right in the middle of the silent era. His brother was also a cinema buff, cinema otaku, and he became a narrator. It was his first job. He started off writing little film criticisms for magazines and pamphlets, and then he got a job as a narrator in the era of the silent films. You needed a narrator, and in Japan the narrator was also a bit of a performer, and had to do the sound effects. He did all the different voices, and so had a certain amount of freedom in what he did and what he contributed to the experience. So Kurosawa himself saw a lot of films throughout his life, and he actually provides a list of his 100 favorite films, which is, you can find, I got it in the book, but it's also in a book by his daughter about him. And it's extraordinary, first of all, because of the history of cinema. He's been through the whole history of cinema, and also the breadth of his tastes. For example, the first film that he mentions is D.W. Griffith's Broken Flowers, which, let me just see, is a, do I have it here? 1919 film. So again, slap in the middle of the silent era. The last film that he chooses is a film by Beat Takeshi, Takeshi Kitano, called Hanabi, which is a crime film which came out in 1997, so just a year before he passed away. So there's a lot. In his 100 films, he's got Woody Allen films, he's got a thriller with Harrison Ford in it. He's also got avant-garde films from the 1920s, Le Chien Andalou of Cocteau and Buñuel. So he's got what we now call art house films. He's got Hollywood, he's got French Nouvelle Vague, he's got the Italians, he's got pretty much everything, every kind of film he voraciously devoured as a film fan himself. So, going on from that, he was in the right place at the right time, but he was the right person. And he had two particular talents which suited him. Perhaps unusual to be so talented in these two particular fields simultaneously. One was his literary sensibility, and the other was his visual sensibility. He left school at the age of 17, and that was the end of his formal education. But he was extremely well read. He says, let me just see if I've got the quote here, "In order to write scripts, you must first study the great novels and dramas of the world. You must consider why they are great." So that was in his advice to young filmmakers. And he was very familiar with all kinds of literature, popular literature, classic literature, Japanese literature, Japanese contemporary and Japanese classic literature. He offered us his 4 favorite books. Number 1, War and Peace, which he claimed, this is a claim with perhaps a little bit of fiction in it, to have read 30 times. It's amazing he had any time to make films, if that was the case, but anyway. Second was Sanshiro by Natsume Soseki. The third one is The Idiot by Dostoevsky. And the fourth one is The Tale of the Heike, which is the famous epic of medieval Japan. So a great variety of influences, and again, this is the Taisho era when all these things were possible. They were just literature. It was interesting in that quote I said, you must study the great novels and dramas of the world, he says, so wherever they may be. Most of Kurosawa's films are adaptations of literary works. There are a few that are not, but you can count them on one hand. And that includes thrillers by Ed McBain, for example, sports novels, judo novels, which were basically aimed at teenagers, and as mentioned, the classics. He had the audacity to adapt Shakespeare, King Lear and Macbeth, and also Dostoevsky. And he did the Idiot, not that successfully, but the Shakespeare adaptations are extremely successful and very interesting because he was very, very bold in the way that he altered the originals to suit his artistic needs. In Castle of Blood, which is his version of, sorry, Throne of Blood, which is his version of Macbeth, it's quite different from Shakespeare's Macbeth. It's more like the original text, which is a chronicle by Holinshed. And basically, his Macbeth and his world is a world in which people are constantly slaughtering each other. Macbeth is not unusual in the Kurosawa film. He's doing what everybody does. And Duncan, the king, who in the Shakespeare play is a noble and gentle old man, in the Kurosawa version, he is a young man, and he's a killer, a slaughterer, and a butcher himself. In fact, his son is a psycho, and there are bloodstains on the wall of the palace where he butchered somebody. So, butchery is the name of the game, it's just business. That's the way the world is. Very different from Macbeth. He does the same thing in Ran with King Lear. Lear, in Kurosawa's formulation, is also a butcher and has exterminated whole clans. Again, nothing personal, it's just business. He had to do it because they were getting in his way for his own power politics. So it's a totally different type of production from what we're familiar with. So he had great audacity in adapting these literary works, great confidence. It's also the case with the Ed McBain novel that he did. The last hour of the film is not in the McBain novel at all. The characters are quite different. He takes the concept of the kidnapping. This is the film called High and Low. He takes the concept of the kidnapping, but changes it dramatically. Not many film directors would have the daring to mess with the classics, as he does, or simply add a whole new story onto the end of a thriller. There is another writer who is very little known outside Japan, who is very influential in Kurosawa's output. He's called Shugoro Yamamoto. And 3 of Kurosawa's films are adaptations of his books, his novels. And there's another one, Ikiru, which is probably highly influenced by a short story of Yamamoto. And after Kurosawa's death, 3 films were made additionally from his scripts that he'd written already, which are also adaptations of this Yamamoto's work. And he's a very interesting writer. He's a bit like Kurosawa, I think, in some ways, in that he is extremely bolshy, difficult guy. He won't accept the normal way of doing things. Let me just find you this little bit to read about that. Here it is. So, Shugoro Yamamoto is the only writer ever to have rejected the Naoki Prize, which is one of Japan's premier literary prizes. It's been going for about 80 years. In the history of this prize, he's the only guy to say, I don't want it. They gave it to him and he was awarded. He said, no, I don't want that. He said this in response: if a fishmonger manages to sell a lot of fish, does he get together with other fishmongers to celebrate? Of course not. It's for that same reason that I don't hang out with other writers. There's nothing to be gained by associating with people from the same trade. I'd rather talk to a conductor on a tram. So you can see he's a pretty awkward customer, this guy. He's not very sociable. But a very interesting figure. And I'm going to show you a clip now from the film Red Beard, which has got three elements to it before we start. It's the novel itself is Yamamoto's novel, Japanese novel, about a doctor in the Edo period who's a conflicted character, but basically very, very well-meaning. Into this story, he drops an episode from a novel by Dostoevsky, which is very little known in the West. It's called Humiliated and Insulted. It's one of the early Dostoevsky novels, but not that well known. And there's another bit of this, which is just pure Kurosawa.
また始めやがった。つらってがましい。このガキはね、最初にここを吹かせてから何かっていうとこの板の間を吹いてばかりやがる。
熱があるな。
そうだ、みんなこういったこういうガキだ。人の恩をあだで返すつむじ曲がりさ。
ひどい熱です。この子は養生所で引き取るぞ。
冗談じゃないよ。人のものをただで取り上げる機会。こいつ。誰か来ておくれ。
なんだ。なんだ。どうした姉さん、何かあったのか。
ていい泥棒さ、この闇医者がね、病気だなんて言いがかりつけてこの子を取り上げるってんだよ。
とんでもねえ。おう。大体てめえは目障りだ。頼むしねえのにこの島へ放ち込みやがって。
さあ、とっとと失せろ。二度と来やがったらただじゃ済まねえぞ。
わしは医者だ。病人のいる限り来る。
何？変な意地があると一生方はなるぜ。
貴様たちもよく考えろ。下手な医者の手にかかると命が危ないというではないか。わしは命は取らないが、手足の日本屋さんもへし折るぐらいのことはやりかねんぞ。出ろ。シュー。
先生。
構うな。手出しはならんぞ。シューシュー。だけど、その辺から板切れを10枚ほど探してこい。安本、手当てをしてやれ。はい。手が来たら俺らのところに添いを当てて布を巻くんだ。少しやりすぎたようだな。もう少し加減をすればよかった。これはひどい。こんな論文は良くない。医者ともある者がこういうことをしてはいけない。
Can you guess which bit was by Dostoevsky in there? Well, actually, the story of the girl who's abused and is worked into illness at a brothel, that's from Dostoevsky. The story of the doctor is from Yamamoto. The fighting is from Kurosawa. But it's in character for the doctor to be critical of himself. This is a line that comes from the novel, and it's the doctor talking about himself. I've known what it is to steal. I've drowned myself in whoring. I've betrayed my mentors. I've sold out my friends. I'm covered in filth with scars everywhere. That's why I understand the feelings of prostitutes and thieves and cowards so well. So that was very attractive, the kind of philosophy of life and that was in Shugoro Yamamoto, was very attractive to Kurosawa and others. There are about 30 Japanese films have been made from Yamamoto novels. Most of them are historical, but not all. So one of Kurosawa's great strengths was the depth of his knowledge of literature and his willingness to take big risks with it. The other was his visual sensitivity. And Kurosawa originally, when he left school at the age of 17, wanted to become a professional painter, an artist. And he was unable to succeed in that, but he did show some pictures at various exhibitions. And one of his pictures, there are photographs of it. I don't think the picture itself still exists, but he showed it at a exhibition of proletarian art, and I think it was 1929 or 1930. So he was a proper artist. He did storyboards for his films, which he would sketch very, very rapidly, and did thousands and thousands and thousands of them over the years. In the 1970s, when he couldn't get finance to make films in Japan, so he had to go overseas, and he went to the people who really liked him in Japan, in the US, who were the young directors coming up, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and Francis Ford Coppola. He gave them large-scale pictures of the film that he was about to make, which was Kagemusha, which is the first clip I showed tonight. There are artists in his films as heroes. One played by Toshiro Mifune, who was quite willing to thump somebody, just like the doctor there. And Van Gogh, he had a special feeling for Van Gogh, and he had in one of his later films, Dreams, one section in that features Martin Scorsese, the director, playing Van Gogh as an actor, and with a very heavy New York accent as well. So it's quite interesting. And there we go. Colour came to Japan, colour film, in the mid-1950s, and film directors who were older and arguably more conservative than Kurosawa went straight to colour, like Yasujiro Ozu, and made several films with colour. Kurosawa waited until 1970 till he made his first colour film, because he felt the colour that was available to filmmakers was of too poor a quality. Only when it had developed and that you could get good colour was he willing to make colour films. Maybe we can just see a couple of clips here. There we go. There we are. that's it, yeah. This is the first film he made, also from a novel by Shugoro Yamamoto, called Kurosawa Den is the name of the film. It's actually a wonderful film, though it was not successful in its time. And he painted the set, an enormous set, which is like a little town. He and his staff together painted that set, and he color-coded. This is actually a little story. It's an omnibus film, but this is a little story about husband swapping. And the red people, they live in the red house and they wear red clothes. And this fellow on the ground, who's drunk out of his mind, is from the house next door. He dresses in yellow, and his house is all yellow. And for some reason, he ends up with this lady, and anyway, it's quite confusing as these things are. But there it is. That's what happens. Next one, please. This is the poster for Dodeska Den, which Kurosawa made himself. And finally, this is a scene from Kagemusha's Nightmare, and I would like to just show that. Maybe we can keep that up. And I'm just going to read you what a well-known Japanese artist said. This is Tadanori Yoko, who is a pop artist from the 1960s and graphic designer. He's still active today. In fact, he's responsible for this shirt I'm wearing, if you're wondering. Anyway, this is what he said. I'm supposed to be a professional artist, but I was never trained in painting from the imagination. So when I draw, I need to look at objects or materials in order to produce anything. Kurosawa, without looking at anything, moves his hands at high speed and captures the expressions, clothes, and gestures of his characters as if sketching from life. It would make any professional go pale. It's if he has already shot the movie in his head. And again, covering the longest wall in the studio was an abstract painting with crazed colours. The painting, I heard, was done by Kurosawa himself. It was a more dynamic and expressionist version of the sky and water in Munch's The Scream. That's that one, by the way. So his great visual sensitivity were another tremendous strength of Kurosawa as a filmmaker. What he did with these capabilities was to create a vision of the human condition. I think we can dispense with that now, thanks. And that's really what makes him great. And I think we're going to have to end up pretty quickly, but I'm just going to read you another quote, which is actually on the back of the book. But I really like this one because he said, this is by Andrei Konchalovsky, who is a Russian who was an assistant to Tarkovsky and then came to Hollywood. He said he had a bust-up, a massive bust-up with Kurosawa when they drank a vast amount of vodka together. And after Kurosawa died, he said this: he knew how low the human animal can go, how many flaws and shortcomings it has. He accepts this human animal as it is without idealizing it. And another quote I have here, last one, is from Shinobu Hashimoto, who I referred to before. He was the joint script writer on some of Kurosawa's greatest films. He says this: all 30 films are connected at a higher level and have a consistent theme. There are no good people in the world, but no evil people either. Everyone lives burdened by good and evil. Can we have the last clip? Yes.
っぱらしいんだろうな。病人のわせるんだからな。
Yes, well, that last scene, you'll have to watch the film to get the whole story. I don't want to give away any spoilers here, but the gangster who dies, arrayed in white like an angel, the film's called Drunken Angel, he's also an angel in a sense. He's an angel for the last 10 minutes of his life. For the rest of his life, he's a brutal criminal who kills, does all kinds of evil things, and he just does one good deed right at the end of the film, and nobody knows about it.